And we're back. So what we're going to talk about now is kind of the history of government regulation in the United States. And if you remember nothing else from this lecture, what you need to remember is that regulation has persistently grown over time. The trend has always been that there is more regulation. And we're going to talk about not only that upward trend of regulation, but also kind of why there's some kind of upticks in regulation at different periods of our history. So let's go ahead and talk about these waves of growth. And so the first wave we're going to talk about is wave one. Okay, wave one kind of represents the beginning of American history up until you might say after Reconstruction in the South, kind of 1870s about there. And the main thing that you want to remember in this is that regulation only existed for the promotion of business interests. Regulation only existed to make sure that the market functioned in the best interest of businesses. Not necessarily functioning with a maximum level of efficiency in kind of a neoclassical economic sense, but maybe more of pardon me, I just lost my train of thought. Not so much in a functioning efficiently in a neoclassical economic sense, but functioning in the best interests of businesses, not even necessarily in the interest of society. Okay. So some of the early forms of regulation, again, were like the Patent and Trademark Office in 1836. Again, making sure if you come up with some sort of an idea or an innovation or even a literary work, that would be protected. Okay? There was also the Copyright Office, again, making sure that ideas and literary works were protected. Bureau of Fishery, making sure that fishermen's rights were respected. And then, of course, a big one, Comptroller of Currency, making sure that there was a single standard currency throughout the United States. And some of you may be interested in history, or you may look at like coin collecting or money collecting. I mean, especially during the Civil War, you know, individual banks would issue their own money. So this would be like a $20 bill for, you know, the bank on the street corner in Maryland, and so it was very complicated, and that was difficult to manage business, especially using paper money. Of course, you had people paying in all sorts of notes in early America, you know, weighing gold and silver, trying to figure out exactly how much a piece of 8 was worth compared to, you know, a 20 franc piece, etc. So the Comptroller of Currency really performed a very important function, kind of fixing the value of money within the U.S. Again, remember nothing else. Remember that the first wave, everything the government did was for the promotion of business interests. Okay. Then we also have wave two, which was, you know, around 1870s up until about World War I. Okay. Okay. And the biggest thing that you want to remember in Wave 2, this was in 1887, there was the Interstate Commerce Commission. And this is really a big deal. You have to remember in early America, before the railroads came about, it was very hard, or it didn't happen as often, that individuals conducted commerce between states. Most of your commerce was conducted within a state, and typically might even have been within which you could walk in a day or even ride on a horse on a single day. So railroads, of course, brought up this whole new issue. Well, how do we regulate trade disputes or commerce in between different states? Because now the railway has made it very possible for individuals to perform commerce between the states. And so the federal government began to step in with this Interstate Commerce Commission to serve as a way to resolve interstate trade disputes. And the ICC was one of the first, what we call an independent regulatory commission. An independent regulatory commission is usually a group of senior civil servants who are typically appointed for very long or lifetime terms, and they're independent of political control. You know, their goal is to make sure that the law is followed irrespective of different political sentiments at the time. Now, of course, in 1914, we also have the Federal Trade Commission. And again, that was done, as we talked about in this book earlier. You have Rockefeller, you have Vanderbilt, you have a lot of these large kind of monopolies that were developing in the United States, predominantly due to railroads and a burgeoning oil business. And so the FTC worked to break up these various monopolies into smaller concerns. So they were trust busters. Okay, they broke it up, and that way, if there was more competition in the market, the idea was, of course, that would provide better prices, more and better goods and services for everyday people. So that's what the FTC did. And of course, by the 1930s, there was even more federal agencies and regulatory commissions. So let's go ahead and do wave 3. So, again, wave 2 was kind of different. It wasn't so much about promoting business interest exclusively at the cost of society, but you also had whereas wave 2, let's sum this up real quick. Wave 1 was looking at how to manage business, or how to manage the economy in the interest of business. Wave 2, you start to see some sort of protection for common people. Wave 3 is very different. Wave 3 starts with the Great Depression. Of course, as many of you know, the Great Depression was one of the greatest economic catastrophes that worldwide that we've ever had. And wave 3, if I were to sum it up, basically says, the government has some sort of a duty and an obligation to intervene in the market and correct it if there's been some sort of a depression or some sort of a flaw in the market. So a lot of this deals with the Great Deal. Okay, this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt's plan. And the Great Deal programs basically brought relief and recovery and reform. Okay, now the Supreme Court thought that FDR was overstepping his boundaries as the president. So what did FDR do? He tried to pass some legislation saying that any judge over, I believe it was the age of 70, would be more, for every judge on the Supreme Court that was over 70, there'd be a new younger judge appointed who would probably be more willing to support FDR's legislation. However, the Supreme Court got the message, and they stopped opposing aspects of the New Deal. And the New Deal has had a few leftovers that we still have today that are for that resulted from the New Deal. Think of FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Okay, that is basically making sure that deposits, I believe now it's up to $250,000, are insured. You have to remember, during the Great Depression, there were runs on banks. So you could go to the bank and say, hey, I want my money. And they'd say, well, we don't have the money, sorry. And what did you do? You lost your money. Okay. There was more regulation of stocks. The Tennessee Valley Authority providing power to a variety of areas, particularly in the rural South. There were public works in some cities. For example, here in Buffalo, you can still see the remnants of some of these public works, art in the street and things like that. The point was just to get people employed. So FDR really established this precedent that, yes, the government can and should intervene in the market to correct flaws when businesses fail to do so, and they're doing it for the benefit of the people. Okay? Now we also got wave 4. So we've talked about this before. The 60s and 70s was kind of a turbulent time in U.S. and international history. You have to remember what was going on. You have civil rights movement, you have the Vietnam War, you have the hippie movement. You have a lot of people who begin questioning whether government actually has societal interests at heart or not. And there's also a lot more protests against business in general. And so what this wound up doing was resulting in an expansion, or very rapid expansion, of government power and ability to regulate. So during the fourth wave, during the 60s and 70s, we had a variety of new commissions that arose that we'll talk about later in this course a little bit more. Things like the Equal Opportunity Commission, Consumer Product Safety Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they also had these new executive agencies. These executive agencies are part of the executive branch, and they're typically run by a single administrator appointed by the executive or the president. Also in the fourth wave of regulation, you had kind of two trends occurring at the same time. On one hand, there were new agencies. At the same time, there was also fewer regulations going on. This is a movement that we call deregulation. And deregulation is the removal or reduction of a body of regulation covering a certain industry. So there were more people monitoring businesses, but there were fewer regulations to go with it. I'm just looking at our time. I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and we'll get to the rest of this on the next video.